Hello, Dr. Core. It's Christy Martorelli. I'm here to do my presentation for Lasa 2, looking at NEU's budget and the expenditures, revenues, and all other relevant questions. All right, here we go. So when looking at the process that Northern Arizona University instills to implement and revise their budget, it was actually quite difficult to find a lot of details about that on their website or anywhere else. There was an extensive amount of information though about their strategic planning process and how this was very heavily connected to their budgeting process. As you look through their most recent strategic plan, which was implemented starting in 2013, it does look like they possibly used a zero budget model as they were planning, as they completely realigned strategic plan goals and reallocated all of their funds based on those goals. Moving forward, there is a reference to performance indicators and the performance around those goals of the strategic plan and how they may allocate funds towards that, but there is not a lot of additional information about specifics on that. As we do go forward though, there is extensive information about their revenues and expenditures listed on their website as related to their current fiscal year budget. As we look at the different sources of revenues, you can see that the first item listed in the revenues is their tuition, which makes up the largest pot at $118 million for the revenues for this year. There are some fees associated in that small amount compared to tuition, however larger than maybe we have seen in years past. As we've talked about, that's a great way to hide some cost to students is in those fees. There is some state land grant endowments and some other miscellaneous revenues, however those come out to be a very small amount. The state land grant endowments are less than $40,000 and the other miscellaneous comes out to a very small percentage of the overall pot. That leaves a state appropriation at $110 million, which you can see is under that $118 million. So if we look at the percentages, our tuition and fees make up 52% of their revenues. The state land grants and endowments are 0.6%, leaving the state appropriation at 47%. So as we look at expenditures, if you may reference one of my previous presentations that NEU has extensive graphs and charts around their expenditures. Their salary does make up the largest expenditure at 62%. Followed closely by the employee-related expenses, as those are closely related, those other expenses that go along with that, but still at 19%. Operations and utilities make up 13%. Professional and outside services are now down to a very small percentage, anything that's not related to those first three. Other wages at 1%. Capital library and equipment, any of those capital outlay budgets is very small at a 1%. And then any travel in and out of state was the only other item listed for expenditures, which is at less than 1%. So looking at the process of the development and the communication of the budget and the strategic plan, there again was not a lot of information about the process in which they allocate funds and rework their budget every year. However, there was extensive information about public awareness and participants in that strategic planning process connected to budget. So if you look at the participants, the strategic planning process, they did begin with some online discussions and then met in face-to-face groups as well. Those online discussions received over 1,084 unique visitors who actively participated in some way. And beyond the initial first few conversations, a minimum of 243 active participants were a part of every subsequent discussion. Those discussions were made up of students, faculty, and staff. Since the plan has been put into place and the current budget is established, public awareness seems to be put out extensively through their website. There is an extensive amount of information there devoted to budget in the finance department, a lot of connections to those folks that are in-house and how to best utilize their budget to support the strategic plan and how their current budget does connect to the strategic plan for the community. There is also reference there that there are 15 community committees, councils, and other community groups that were already established at the time of the current strategic plan and budget being approved, and that those 15 groups are actively involved in the communication and delivery of that communication out, and that they are still looking at that and revising the strategic plan as it relates to the budget and to their goals. As far as unusual expenditures, I feel like I've worked through this budget now to where there really are nothing that sticks out, none of those pieces that stick out extensively to me now. However, initially the technology piece, before I saw the whole overall amount that the capital was, I was slightly concerned that their technology was going to take up more than 30% of their capital budget, but when I did realize that that capital budget was such a small percentage of the overall amount, I'm surprised they can only spend 30% of that on technology, where I initially thought that might be a large percentage. Also looking at salaries, that's a very large percentage of their expenditures, and that did seem extremely high to me, but as you look at the rest of their budget, you see that they really spend money on very little else. Specifically, as we both know, to the budget cuts here, and lining those expenditures to the strategic plan, the salaries really are most aligned to their strategic plan, and it makes sense that that's where they would spend the largest percentage of their monies. As far as that capital outlay, again, going back to that initial thought that there are very limited funds, that it's only approximately 1% of their overall budget. We know we haven't had any capital funds allocated to us here in Arizona in quite a long time. It is $898,000 total capital budget from 14-15. Again, $237,000 approximately will be spent just under technology. That leaves less than $500,000 remaining for all of their capital expenses that they may need. And knowing that Northern Arizona University is there up where they receive snow, and they have quite an extensive amount of older buildings, that could be very limited for them for those permanent purchases that they need to make to upgrade some of those pieces. All right, as far as the budget overall, having used it quite a few times now, there are some pieces that do make it fairly easy to use. They do have that very clear revenue section, and the expenditures section is quite expansive, giving graphs and visuals broken out not just by department, but by the actual expenditure itself. There are percentages labeled on everything in all parts of the budget, which makes it very easy to see where they prioritize their funds. However, it does need some sort of an overview with some more common language and more description. As I said, although there are, no joke, maybe 100 pages worth of details on expenditures, there really is no information about the creation of the budget, some of those common terms or languages that are used throughout the document. That would definitely make it a lot easier for the public to understand. If you weren't sitting down with them, you really wouldn't understand the process that had gone through. All right, those are my references. Thank you so very much for the opportunity to complete my presentation this way.